On the morning of March 16, 1968, a U.S. Army helicopter pilot named Hugh Thompson, Jr. flew over a village in South Vietnam and watched American soldiers killing unarmed civilians. He landed his helicopter between the soldiers and the people they were killing. He ordered his crew to open fire on the Americans if they did not stop. He called in additional helicopters to evacuate survivors. He reported what he had seen up the chain of command. He was 25 years old. He was a warrant officer in the United States Army, and the people he had just intervened against were his own. What followed, in the Army, in the country, and in his own life, took decades to resolve. For most of those decades, it did not resolve in his favor. That is the shape of the story. In the early months of 1968, the Vietnam War was in one of its most volatile periods. The Tet Offensive in January had broken assumptions about the conflict's direction across Washington and within the military command structure. American units operating in Quang Ngai Province were conducting aggressive operations against suspected Viet Cong strongholds in a zone called Pinkville. The villages in that area were designated as hostile territory. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, had been taking casualties from mines and booby traps for weeks. They had been told to expect armed resistance when they went into My Lai. When Charlie Company entered the hamlet on the morning of March 16th, they found no armed combatants. What they found was a civilian population, primarily elderly men, women, and children. What happened next was a massacre. Thompson was piloting an OH-23 observation helicopter above My Lai that morning, part of a light scout team assigned to provide reconnaissance support for the ground operation. His crew that day included Crew Chief Lawrence Colburn, 20 years old, and Gunner Glenn Andriotta, 18. Both would be critical to what happened next. From the air, Thompson could see what was happening below. He marked wounded civilians with smoke to indicate they needed medical attention. He watched as soldiers approached the marked civilians and killed them instead. He landed near a ditch where a large number of civilians had been gathered and where the killing was continuing. He got out of the helicopter. He confronted the officer in charge, Lieutenant William Calley, and an argument followed. Thompson then positioned his helicopter between a group of civilians sheltering in a bunker and the soldiers moving toward them. He radioed for additional helicopters and ordered Colburn and Andriotta to train their weapons on the American soldiers and fire if those soldiers attempted to harm the civilians. The surviving civilians, including a number of children, were evacuated. Andriotta pulled a child alive from the ditch. Thompson filed reports on what he had witnessed that same day. He described what he had seen and done with the specificity of a man who understood the account would matter beyond that morning. That decision did not end when he lifted off. Thompson reported the killings through military channels immediately. His reports described an unambiguous breach, unprovoked killing of non-combatants on a significant scale. For more than a year, nothing was done. The incident was logged as a successful combat engagement. The body count was recorded. The reports Thompson had filed were not acted upon. The story became public in November 1969, 18 months after the massacre, when journalist Seymour Hersh broke it, following the work of Ron Ridenour, a veteran who had heard first-hand accounts from men who were there and sent detailed letters to Congress and the Pentagon demanding investigation. The Army then convened formal proceedings. Of the men charged in connection with the massacre, only one was convicted. Lieutenant William Calley, found guilty of murdering 22 civilians. He served 3.5 years under house arrest. His sentence was reduced twice. He was ultimately pardoned by President Nixon. Thompson was called to testify before Congress. He described what he had seen and what he had done. The reception was not warm. He came home to a country deeply divided over the war, and when My Lai became public, divided over the massacre itself. Some Americans viewed the soldiers of Charlie Company as victims of a failed policy and an impossible war. Others viewed Thompson not as a man who had done the right thing, but as someone who had exposed and condemned fellow Americans. He received hate mail. He received death threats. In certain military and veteran communities, his actions at My Lai were not viewed as honorable intervention. They were viewed as betrayal. The years after Vietnam were difficult in the specific way that comes from being the person who tried to stop something and was then treated for years as the one who had done wrong. He struggled with what he had witnessed. He struggled with the response to his own testimony. He continued to speak about My Lai when asked, and he was not always treated well for doing so. Andreotta had been killed in combat 3 weeks after the massacre. Colburn and Thompson remained, carrying what they had witnessed and done, year after year, in a country that offered them little acknowledgement. For decades, his name was not spoken with honor. In 1998, 30 years after My Lai, Hugh Thompson, Lawrence Colburn, and a posthumous award for Glenn Andreotta were each presented with the Soldier's Medal, the Army's highest award for non-combat heroism, by General Dennis Reimer, the Army Chief of Staff. The ceremony took place at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. The citation recognized their actions in placing themselves between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians. The award prompted renewed public examination of the massacre and of the men involved. Thompson gave interviews in which he spoke with the same precision about what he had witnessed that he had brought to his original reports. He lectured at universities. He returned to Vietnam, to My Lai itself, and met survivors of the massacre, an experience he described as one of the most meaningful of his life. The historical record was updated, not rewritten, but finally completed in a way that acknowledged what Thompson, Colburn, and Andreotta had done alongside what Charlie Company had done. Not every reaction to the award was positive. Members of Congress objected to it. Thompson received additional threatening correspondence. The record changed. The day did not. My Lai did not happen because of one rogue unit. It happened because a chain of command failed, from the soldiers on the ground to the officers who buried the reports. Hugh Thompson was inside that chain. He was the one who refused to let it continue. He was not a protester or a conscientious objector. He was a soldier operating within the military, subject to its authority and its culture, who faced a situation on a single morning that the system had failed to prevent, and then spent 30 years refusing to honestly account for. The gap between what he did and how long it took to acknowledge it is as much a part of the record as the act itself. He reported what he saw. He testified to what he had done. He returned to My Lai and stood in the place where it happened. He spoke about it for the rest of his life, in interviews, before Congress, at universities, on return visits to Vietnam. He died in 2006 in Pineville, Louisiana. He was 62 years old. War tests more than the willingness to advance under fire. Sometimes it tests whether a soldier will hold the line against his own, stand between an atrocity and its continuation, accept the personal and professional cost, and act without any certainty the institution he serves will ever call it right. Thompson accepted that test. He paid the cost of it for decades. He chose to intervene. If this story raises questions worth sitting with, about what soldiers owe their conscience, about what gets buried and what finally gets acknowledged, consider subscribing. Share your thoughts in the comments.